Okay, so next we've got another part 2 answer, and this topic is focusing on language. So the topic is about the first time you used a foreign language to communicate. They want to know, who did you communicate with? What did you say or write? What the situation was, and explain your feelings during the experience. Okay, so quite a nice topic, an interesting prompt. This might be difficult for some people to remember on the spur of the moment. This is, like, I think, one of those topics where it's better just to kind of lie a little bit and make some stuff up, because I think some candidates spend too much time trying to remember, when was the first time I used a foreign language to communicate? If you don't have a strong memory, if it was just in elementary school or something, maybe you don't remember. So I would advise my students in this situation, if you see this kind of question, you think, oh, I don't know when the first time was, pick an incident that happened recently that you remember, and then just pretend that was your first time. So you might be like, the only thing you can think of is, oh yeah, no, I remember last week I gave someone directions at Seoul train station. Okay, and then just pretend that was your first time. The first time I used language, because it's easier to find in your memory. You know, I don't want my students to spend too much time trying to honestly remember the first time they used a foreign language to communicate. If you asked me when was the first time I used a foreign language to communicate, I wouldn't be able to tell you when it was, but I have a strong memory of being in France as a sort of 12-year-old school kid on a school trip, trying to buy a baguette sandwich in the shop. So I would just lie and say that was the first time I tried to use a foreign language to communicate, just because I have a strong memory of it. So that is usually always my advice for candidates, because otherwise you spend a lot of time panicking, trying to remember, and then you don't have enough time to prepare. So pick something you have a strong memory of and just tell the examiner that was your first time using a foreign language. They won't know if you're lying. Okay, so let's listen to see what this candidate says.
I'd like to share my old memory with you when I used a foreign language for the first time to communicate with others. Since I was born and grew up in Korea, my mother tongue is Korean, and I can speak English as well. Last year, I got a chance to use a little knowledge of Japanese I have. Back then, my cousin who studied abroad in Japan invited me to visit her. When she first asked me, I thought I wouldn't be able to make it alone. Because, to be honest, I've been to Japan so many times, but my mother, who is very good at Japanese as she used to live in Japan, always spoke. So I could only say a simple greeting in Japanese. Nevertheless, I decided to go alone, and I bought a Japanese book and learned it diligently from my mother for about 2 weeks. On the day of my trip, I had to take a bus from the airport in Tokyo to Yokohama, where my sister was. However, when I tried to speak Japanese to natives, I was very nervous, and finally my mind went blank. At that moment, I could only think of English, but even though they were working at the airport, they were not good at English. So I remember that I struggled quite a lot when booking tickets and finding directions. Fortunately, I found my way safely, and I could meet my sister, and we had a wheel of time. After this trip, I eagerly wanted to learn Japanese because I envied my mom and sister who spoke a foreign language fluently. If I master this language, I would like to make a solitary journey to Japan.
Okay, nice. What an interesting story. They picked a nice memory, a good clear example of what the topic was, and I think this candidate really comprehensively covered all parts of the question. In terms of fluency, I really like this candidate's opening sentence where she said, I'd like to share my old memory with you. I think that's a really nice opening to your topic. And that's the kind of sentence that you can memorize and you can deploy in so many different situations in the IELTS for different topics. But I really like it. I think that was a very good opening. I liked her sort of linking of the story together. So she used phrases like nevertheless, and other phrases like that to link her story together. After that, when I first got there, the reason was because, so the story links together nicely and it feels like she's telling me a story. The only thing I don't know if this goes under fluency, but at the start of the story, she said she was visiting her cousin, and then the end of the story, she's like visiting her sister. So I was just a bit confused about whether we were looking at her sister or her cousin. That's fine. Like I don't think that's like a serious sort of error. I might just have misunderstood the situation. But yeah, I thought fluency was good. Pace was good. The only thing that is going to sort of link between the fluency and pronunciation is this particular candidate sounded a little bit like a robot in terms of her pace was very consistent. Her tone was very consistent. She's telling the story. This happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And I felt nervous, and then they couldn't speak English to me. And then I bought a book to learn Japanese. And then I went to Yokohama, and then I envied my mother and my sister. So everything sort of ends up flowing into sort of the same tone, which is kind of not good for either the fluency or pronunciation. So my question to this candidate would be, were they speaking from their brain? Or were they reading off a piece of paper? Or had they memorized an answer from a script and was repeating it from memory? Okay. Any one of those sort of situations are going to inevitably make you sound robotic, because when you're concentrating on reading the words from a script, it's much harder for a non-native speaker to put in feeling. I mean, it's difficult for a native speaker too. You know, that's why being a voice actor or being an actor is a special profession. If I'm just reading off a script, it's hard sometimes for me to remember to put in certain, like, you know, inflections or intonation or make my voice sound different depending on what I want to say to people. So, you know, that's quite difficult. So one of the sort of downsides of practicing by memorizing scripts is that you're not really focusing on your pronunciation or intonation features at all. So, I mean, I don't want to, you know, it could be possible that the candidate is you know, just was speaking naturally her answer. And if so, that's amazing, because it was a very good answer. But my feeling was that the lack of intonation made it sound like this candidate was reading or reciting something that they memorized. So that would be a question I would ask this student if they sent this to me in my class. In terms of pronunciation, very good, very consistent. I liked how she talked about even though they worked in an airport. So it's quite a sort of complex, a sort of a difficult pronunciation of two the sounds, and I thought this candidate did that really well. It was very clear what she was saying. However, there was a couple of words that weren't super clear for me. She talked about booking. I think she talked about when she got it was difficult for her booking. I think she said tickets and finding directions. I'm pretty sure she said tickets, but it was sort of, again, she was too soft on her consonants at the start. Instead of going the hard tickets, it's kind of like tickets. So by being too soft at the start, it kind of makes the word more mushy and less clear for me to understand. So it should have been a hard, clear T at the start and then a K sound, tickets, okay, to make it much easier for me to understand what she was saying. The same as she talked about being in Japan with her sister, and she used a really nice phrase, which I'm going to put into my vocab section, because she talked about having a whale of a time. She said we had a whale of time. It should have been a whale of a time, but her pronunciation of whale was also a little bit unclear. So it's got that sort of, whale is a little bit harder because it's starting with the W sound, so it's going for that what, okay? So you want to push your lips forward and your jaw downwards to the what sound at the start. Whale of a time. Okay, and you're really emphasizing the A sound. Okay, that's the strongest part of the word. Whale. Okay, so you're going down and then back to create that sound. We had a whale of a time. Okay, this is also a really good chance to use your intonation features, because when you're saying whale of a time, you're really emphasizing that it was so much fun. So you really want to emphasize whale either through volume, through making that word louder, making that word slower. We had a whale of a time, okay? Making your voice deeper. We had a whale of a time, okay? That also shows feeling, all right? So that was an opportunity for this candidate to put in some intonation features. There was also this idea that she talked about envying her mum and sister. She said, I'm pretty sure she said envied my mum and sister. And again, envied, it was just the sound of it was too soft. She didn't sound confident enough when saying it. She didn't sort of go hard enough into the V sound. Envied. I really envied my mum and sister. So that needed to go in harder, to make it a little bit clearer. Moving on to vocabulary, I thought she used a lot of really great vocabulary. She talked about mother tongue. She used the phrase mind went blank. My mind went blank. Which is a really nice, natural phrase to use. She talked about being nervous, which is great. Sort of she uses some nice emotional vocabulary. The only thing that sounded strange when she said it was the idea of making a solitary journey. Like in the future, she said, I want to make a solitary journey to Japan. It sounded unnatural to use in speech. We don't tend to say that. It sounds like you're writing a novel or writing a book. It's too formal really for this context. So if she wants to make a solitary journey, it would just be much more natural to say, I want to travel alone to Japan, or I want to make a solo trip to Japan would be a much more natural way of saying it. Her grammar I thought was nice and very accurate. There was just one area where she missed out the end of the word. She was talking about how her mother is good at Japanese because she used to live in Japan and always spoke. And then she ends it here. She just kind of goes, she always spoke, and then finishes the sentence. But she always spoke what? She always spoke Japanese at home. Okay, so that just needed a little bit of extra information. But overall, I thought a very good answer, a nice story. I used to live in Japan, so I have sympathy for the trying to communicate with someone at the airport who doesn't speak English. So yeah, I thought it was a nice story, well told. This candidate needs to work on her intonation and a couple of instances of pronunciation. But overall, I thought a very strong answer. Let's listen to the part 3. So do many people in your country learn a foreign language? And what age? So give me an opinion. What age is it best to learn a foreign language? So let's see what she did.
Absolutely. Even though my country has its own language, learning a foreign language is taken for granted. Due to globalization, people from all walks of life learn foreign languages for different purposes. It is common to learn, to travel abroad, or seek employment. And nowadays, people study it in order to watch foreign dramas without subtitles, as media such as Netflix develops. In my opinion, children should learn a foreign language in their formative years, so teachers have to impart language knowledge to their disciples from the primary class. It can be stressful for children to be educated a new language before mastering their mother tongue. It may lead to chaos. In addition, during this period, there is less burden of studies on students.
Okay, so that was a nice comprehensive answer. I thought this candidate answered the question well. She focused on the topic. I also appreciated how she finished her answer when she was done talking. One of the issues that some candidates have in part 3 is that they don't feel confident in finishing their answer when they said everything they want to say. So there's two things. I have sort of two types of student. There's the type of student who doesn't spend enough time answering their part 3, whose answers are too short. And then there's the type of student who sort of panics and waits for the examiner to cut them off, and so ends up rambling on, getting confused, repeating themselves, okay, and going back on themselves and repeating the same information, all of which affects your fluency scores. So what I liked about this candidate is she was nicely in the middle. Her answers were a good length, directly focused on the question, and she didn't go back and repeat the same ideas again and again. So for example, a candidate might say in answer to the first question, do many people in your country learn a foreign language? Yeah, it's really common for people in my country to learn a foreign language. We learn it from elementary school. It's so important now to go to university and get a job. Yes, and so as I said, we start learning in elementary school from age 6, and it's young to learn a language, but your teacher tells you need to get a job and go to university, so you start studying even from elementary school. So can you see how I started to go back and repeat the same information? Because I felt like sort of panicked, like I hadn't given enough or said enough. So that can be a problem for your fluency. So what I really liked about what this particular candidate did is that she gave her clear answer and then she finished. She stopped when she'd finished. She'd said everything she wanted to say. So that's a practice thing. That's something you can practice, is just by getting a list of example part 3 questions and literally just practicing by recording yourself. And then you kind of get a feeling of how long naturally you want to talk, and you practice thinking of your ideas. So when you get into the exam, they ask you a question, hopefully that you've already covered before, or that you've already practiced before. Okay. So I thought this candidate, again, her fluency was excellent. Her grammar was really good, very consistent, very few mistakes. In terms of pronunciation, there was one word that I listened several times and I really wasn't sure what she was saying. Where she talks about how it's kind of can be stressful for elementary school kids to learn English before they've mastered Korean. And she says it may lead to something. It sounded like she said callous. It may lead to callous or something like that. But I listened several times and I wasn't, even from the context, I couldn't really guess what she was trying to say. So that would be something she could practice on. That whatever that particular word was, I think is one that she needs to practice. But overall, pronunciation good. Similar as her last question, a little bit of intonation. This answer was actually slightly better in that she showed me a bit more variation in tone. She went slightly higher or lower a little bit in her answers, but still not enough to be getting into those really high pronunciation band scores. Sorry. So I think that's really something that, again, based on both her answers, that she really needs to work on is her intonation and not being embarrassed to try out these pronunciation features. Okay, so one thing to do, record yourself in your phone, obviously, practice in front of a mirror, take a drama class and get a bit more confident in showing your feelings. It's a slight cultural thing, in English speakers have a reputation sometimes for being kind of outgoing and loud and rude sometimes. But just because our language naturally requires a bit of variation, a bit of up and down. She used some really great vocabulary in this answer. I loved how she started her first answer with the word absolutely. A really great word, very confident, and she goes right into directly answering the questions. That was a really good way to start. She talks about learning English being taken for granted, okay, which is another really nice natural phrase. Like, it's taken for granted that you'll speak a second language, which I think is great. She talks about subtitles or Netflix, which is a nice specific language. She talks about formative experience. She talks about teachers imparting wisdom to their students. Impart from a teacher is really good. My teacher imparted knowledge to me, okay? So that was a really good verb to use. The only issue I sort of wanted to pick up on is when she refers to the disciples in class. So we wouldn't ever say disciples. I can see that she's trying to paraphrase students, but disciples is not the correct word. A disciple is kind of religious. It's kind of like a cult kind of word. You have a disciple in a cult, you have a disciple in a religion. It doesn't really apply to a classroom. Student is fine to say in this situation, okay, to the students, because it's really the only correct word to use in this situation. So that was the only word that she used that I felt, that's not quite the right use of that word in context. But yeah, overall, I thought this was a really great answer. My only question for this candidate would be that she needs to really work on her intonation features because everything else is consistent. She's cracked the most difficult part of it, which is having consistently accurate grammar in terms of tenses and things like that. So in terms of the grammar, there wasn't any mistakes that I sort of heard. But again, like I said before, I would like her to take the opportunity to use a bit more advanced grammar in terms of comparison. So this question gave you the opportunity to compare between learning at a young age and learning at an old age, or compare between how people learned languages in the past and how people learn languages today. So there was a lot of chances for her to use a bit more advanced grammar. But overall, so in terms of pronunciation was probably the weakest section for this candidate because of the sort of slightly robotic nature of it. So it kind of stuck at a 6.0 because of the lack of intonation features. In terms of vocabulary, really great vocabulary. I would definitely put it at a 7. Like, she uses some really nice phrases. Whale of a time, mind went blank. Formative years taken for granted. Some of these really great phrases that are sort of very natural for a native speaker to use. In terms of grammar, range, and accuracy was great. Range needs some work, but again, still, I would definitely say up in the sort of 6.5 category. In terms of fluency and coherence, I really loved how her story flowed. Everything linked together very nicely. I would definitely want to put her in a 7 for that. But my only question again to this candidate would be, was she speaking like from her head, like in a real situation, or was she reading off a script? So that would be my only question. But I feel bad saying that. Maybe she's not. So I think overall coming out at a 6.5, I think definitely room to come out at a 7. for sure. I might actually just use my calculator just to check. It might actually work out at coming out at a 7 if we round up. So everyone get excited as I add this all together. And it is coming out at 6.5. But I think definitely if she could just use a little bit more pronunciation features, I think we definitely move up to a 7. And if she just used a couple more sort of different tenses or something like that in her answer, just to show me more range, because her accuracy is really great. And that's actually the most difficult part. But now she has the accuracy down. I would really like her to see trying to expand her range, specifically knowing when to drop in a conditional sentence, a hypothetical, a comparison change over time. You know, people have been learning English in my country for over 50 years. Recently, the number of people who have been becoming fluent in a foreign language has been increasing exponentially. You know, being able to sort of throw out some more of those more complex tenses would really help her range. But overall, I thought a really excellent answer, very solid, and not many areas to improve apart from the range and the intonation.